They promised change so loudly that the whole country heard it. New laws, new faces, new words repeated on every screen. But years later, nothing around the people actually changed, except the silence. No riots. No celebrations. Just a strange acceptance, as if everyone was waiting for something that never arrived. And the unsettling part isn't that change failed. It's that someone knew it would fail from the very beginning, and chose to stay quiet. The days after the promises passed without drama. No explosions of anger, no sudden collapse. Life simply continued, almost stubbornly normal. Every morning, the same buses stopped at the same corners. The same vendors opened their metal shutters with a tired screech. Coffee steamed in chipped mugs while radios murmured news that sounded important but changed nothing. The world felt calm on the surface, like a town holding its breath without realizing it. People still laughed in small ways. A joke exchanged in line. A neighbor waving from across the street. Children ran between parked cars, inventing games out of cracks in the pavement. On the walls, faded posters still carried the smiling faces of leaders who had promised a future that now felt oddly distant. No one bothered tearing them down. They blended into the background, like old calendar pages no one remembered to remove. At the corner bakery, prices had gone up again, quietly. The owner didn't explain it. He never did. He just tapped the new numbers onto a small sign and avoided eye contact when customers hesitated. Most paid anyway. Complaining required energy, and energy felt expensive lately. Outside, a man swept the sidewalk every morning, even though it would be dusty again by noon. He said it helped him think, but no one ever asked what about. Afternoons moved slowly. Offices hummed with fluorescent lights and half-finished conversations. Meetings ended with polite nods and no conclusions. Forms were filled out, stamped, filed, and forgotten. Somewhere deep inside the system, things were always being reviewed. People learned to recognize that phrase as a soft ending, not a beginning. Still, they showed up the next day. They always did. In the evenings, televisions glowed behind thin curtains. The same voices returned, explaining why patience was necessary, why progress took time, why this phase was difficult but essential. Families ate dinner while listening, nodding automatically, like the words were part of the furniture. Nobody argued with the screen anymore. Arguing felt pointless, almost embarrassing, like shouting at the weather. What made it stranger was how quickly this normality settled in. Not because people believed the promises, but because disbelief had nowhere to go. There was no clear moment when hope died. It just thinned out, like fog under the sun, until one day people realized they could see straight through it. And yet, no one said that out loud. By night, the streets grew quiet. Lights flickered off window by window. Somewhere, a siren wailed and then faded into nothing. From the outside, the city looked peaceful. Safe, even. But beneath that calm lived a quiet understanding shared by almost everyone. The change they were waiting for was no longer on its way. And somehow, without discussing it, they had all agreed to keep living as if tomorrow would look exactly like today. No one remembered exactly when Elias started standing near the old bus stop. He didn't ask for money. He didn't sell anything. He just stood there most mornings, slightly apart from the crowd, as if he was waiting for a bus that never appeared on the schedule. People noticed him the way they notice a new crack in the wall, slowly, without urgency. Elias was quiet in a way that felt intentional. He nodded when spoken to, smiled softly when someone complained about the delays or the prices or the news. He never joined the conversation, but he listened with a patience that made people talk longer than they meant to. There was nothing threatening about him. If anything, he felt reassuring, like someone who had already accepted something the rest of the city was still negotiating with. What made him strange wasn't what he said, because he said almost nothing, but what he carried. A small, worn notebook, always tucked under his arm. The cover was cracked, the pages yellowed at the edges. Once, a woman asked him what was inside. Elias hesitated, then replied, "Things that were promised." He said it gently, almost kindly, and changed the subject before she could ask more. Some swore he showed up right after the speeches ended. Others believed he had been there long before, unnoticed. No one could agree. Even the shop owners closest to the stop gave different answers, as if time bent slightly around him. The only thing consistent was that he never looked surprised, not by delays, not by announcements, not by disappointment. Children seemed drawn to him. They asked questions adults no longer did. Elias always answered them, but never directly. "Why don't things change?" one boy asked. Elias smiled and said, "They do. Just not where you're told to look." The boy ran off, unsatisfied. The adults who overheard felt something tighten in their chest. As days passed, people began to notice something unsettling. When Elias wasn't there, the waiting felt heavier, louder, as if his quiet presence had been holding something back, something no one was ready to name yet. The first real questions didn't come from journalists or officials. They came from ordinary people who began comparing small, uncomfortable details. Someone mentioned that Elias always arrived before the announcements played on the street speakers. Another noticed he left minutes before inspectors or representatives showed up. It wasn't dramatic enough to feel like a conspiracy, just precise enough to feel deliberate. A woman who worked nights swore she had seen him writing in the notebook long after the buses stopped running. She described his hand moving slowly, carefully, as if each word carried weight. When she asked what he was writing at that hour, Elias looked up and said, "What didn't happen today?" He closed the notebook immediately after, as if the moment had passed. Curiosity spread quietly. People didn't ask him direct questions. Instead, they tested him. They complained about broken promises, delayed aid, unfinished projects. Elias listened, nodded, sometimes smiled, and then responded with unsettling accuracy. He would mention dates no one remembered, programs that had been announced and quietly dissolved, names of committees that never produced results. Always factual, always calm, never accusatory. This raised a larger question no one wanted to say out loud. How did he know all this? Elias had no phone, no badge, no visible connection to the system. Yet he spoke like someone who had watched it closely, patiently, from the inside. When pressed, he never denied anything, but he never confirmed it either. "Some things," he said once, "are easier to see when you stop expecting them to work." Then came the moment that unsettled everyone. A new announcement echoed through the district, promising immediate change. People rolled their eyes, already turning away. Elias didn't react at all. He didn't sigh. He didn't smile. He simply wrote a single line in his notebook and closed it. A man nearby asked, half joking, "Already giving up on it?" Elias looked at him, eyes steady, and replied, "No. Just recording where it ends." That night, word spread faster than usual. Not because of fear, but because the question had finally formed clearly in everyone's mind. If Elias was recording the endings, who, exactly, was supposed to read them? After that night, the city seemed to watch Elias instead of the screens. His presence, once easy to ignore, became a quiet reference point. People began adjusting their expectations based on whether he was writing or simply observing. When he stood still, hands folded over the notebook, conversations softened. When he wrote, a subtle tension spread, like the air before a storm that never quite arrived. The notebook itself became a source of unease. Its pages were thicker now, swollen from years of ink and pressure. No one ever saw him tear a page out. No one ever saw him flip backward. Each entry felt final, irreversible. A shopkeeper joked that Elias was keeping the city's real history. The joke didn't land the way he expected. It felt too close to the truth. Then the strange patterns began to surface. A promised renovation was cancelled the same afternoon Elias filled 3 full pages. A social program disappeared from the news cycle the morning after he underlined a single sentence twice. People noticed because they were looking for it now. Or maybe it had always been happening, invisible until someone stood still long enough to notice. Officials started appearing more often. Not openly, not aggressively, just present. Men and women in clean coats lingered near the bus stop, pretending to check their phones, pretending not to watch him. Elias acknowledged them with the same polite nod he gave everyone else. He never changed his routine. If anything, he seemed calmer, as if the attention confirmed something he already knew. One afternoon, a young woman asked him directly why he kept writing. Elias considered the question longer than usual. "So it doesn't disappear," he said finally. When she asked what he meant, He closed the notebook and replied, "So it can't be rewritten." The answer left her unsettled in a way she couldn't explain. That same evening, the announcements changed tone. The voices sounded tighter, more defensive. Promises became broader, less specific. Dates vanished. Responsibility shifted. People felt it immediately. The words were softer, but the distance behind them was larger. Late that night, Elias was still at the bus stop when a black car slowed beside the curb. The window rolled down just enough to reveal a silhouette. No one heard what was said. But when the car drove away, Elias remained standing, and for the first time, his hand trembled as he opened the notebook and began to write again. The shift was subtle at first, almost polite. Services began arriving late, then not at all. Offices shortened their hours without explanation. Hotlines played recorded apologies that led nowhere. People felt it most in the small emergencies, the moments when help was supposed to be automatic. That was when they realized something was being pulled back, quietly, as if in response to something unseen. Elias noticed before anyone else said it aloud. He stopped writing as often. Instead, he watched. His eyes followed people as they approached the bus stop with folded papers, with questions, with frustration they didn't know where to place. When someone complained about a missing payment or a delayed permit, Elias listened carefully, then wrote a single line. Never more. Never less. The consequences spread outward. A woman lost her job because a subsidy vanished overnight. A family waited weeks for repairs that had once taken days. Each story felt isolated, but together they formed a pattern that no official explanation could cover. People began to understand that the promises hadn't just failed, they were being erased. Some blamed Elias. Not loudly, not cruelly, but with nervous logic. If he was recording the failures, maybe he was causing them. Maybe writing them down made them real. Whispers followed him now. Conversations stopped when he stepped too close. The kindness that once surrounded him thinned into suspicion. Elias didn't defend himself. He never raised his voice. When someone accused him directly, he simply replied, "I only stay where it already hurts." That answer unsettled more than any denial could have. It suggested the pain existed first, waiting. One evening, a crowd gathered near the bus stop after another announcement quietly disappeared. Tension filled the air, thick and restless. Someone demanded Elias show them the notebook. Just one page. Just proof. He held it tighter, his knuckles pale. "This isn't for you," he said, not unkindly. "Then who is it for?" someone shouted. Elias looked past the crowd, toward the darkened offices and silent screens. "For when they say it never happened," he replied. The crowd fell silent. And in that quiet, everyone realized the danger wasn't Elias anymore. It was what would happen if his notebook was ever taken away. The first attempt came before dawn. No uniforms. No announcements. Just two men waiting by the bus stop when the streets were still empty and the air smelled like rain. They stood where Elias usually stood, as if rehearsing his place in the world. When he arrived, they didn't introduce themselves. They didn't threaten him either. They smiled. They asked for the notebook. Not demanded. Asked. As if it were a formality already approved somewhere higher than language. Elias listened, nodded once, and replied with a question of his own. "Which version do you want?" The men exchanged a glance. One of them said, carefully, "The accurate one." Elias smiled for the first time in days. "Then you don't," he said, and turned to leave. By midday, the city felt tighter. Networks went down in certain districts. Announcements looped older speeches instead of new ones. A sense of repetition settled in, heavy and deliberate. People noticed that Elias hadn't returned to the bus stop. The space he occupied felt exposed, like a missing tooth. That afternoon, a rumor spread faster than any official message. Someone had seen Elias taken into one of the buildings where promises were made and archived. Someone else swore they heard raised voices behind closed doors. No one could confirm anything. That uncertainty hurt more than the truth would have. Near evening, Elias reappeared. He walked slowly, his coat torn at the sleeve, the notebook pressed flat against his chest. He didn't sit. He didn't write. He just stood there while people gathered, drawn by relief and fear in equal measure. When someone asked what had happened, Elias answered with a sentence that landed like a blow. They want the story without the waiting. No one understood fully, but everyone felt it. The men hadn't wanted lies, they wanted clean endings. Narratives that resolved themselves neatly, without names, without dates, without responsibility. Elias had refused. As night fell, the screens changed again. A single message repeated everywhere, stripped of emotion. This phase has concluded. Elias looked at the glowing words, then finally opened the notebook. He turned to a page no one had ever seen before and began to write, not about a failure, but about a choice. By morning, the truth could no longer stay hidden behind silence. Elias didn't wait for questions this time. He spoke first, his voice calm but steady, as if he had finally accepted that the moment he was preparing for had arrived. He explained that the notebook was never meant to expose power in the way people imagined. It wasn't a weapon or evidence for punishment. It was a record of distance, the space between what was promised and what was lived. Elias had worked once in the place where promises were written. Not as a leader, not as a decision-maker, but as someone who corrected language, adjusted tone, and removed details that made commitments too real. Over time, he noticed a pattern. The more carefully words were crafted, the less they were meant to be fulfilled. Promises weren't broken, they were designed to dissolve. When he questioned it, he was told it was necessary. Stability, they said, required hope without delivery. So Elias began copying the original versions. The first drafts. The parts that never reached the people. Dates that were erased. Numbers softened. Responsibilities blurred. When he was told to stop, he didn't argue. He simply left, taking the record with him. The bus stop wasn't random. It was where people waited, where delay was felt in the body. He stayed there because it was honest. The notebook grew because the distance kept growing. And when officials tried to take it, it wasn't because it was false, but because it was complete. He looked around at the faces watching him now. They promised change, he said quietly. And it happened. Just not for you. The silence that followed wasn't anger. It was grief, sharp, clean, undeniable. People finally understood. The failure wasn't incompetence. It was design. And Elias hadn't been documenting collapse. He had been preserving proof that the people were never forgotten, only excluded. Elias closed the notebook for the last time as the crowd slowly dispersed. No orders were given. No chants rose. People simply went home carrying something heavier than anger, understanding. The streets looked the same, but they no longer felt neutral. Every sign, every announcement, every polished phrase now carried a visible seam, a place where something had been cut away. In the days that followed, Elias stopped coming to the bus stop. Some said he had been taken. Others believed he left on his own, finally finished. What remained was quieter but far more dangerous to those in power: memory. People began repeating details to one another. Dates. Numbers. Exact words they remembered hearing once, before they were softened and blurred. The notebook was no longer a single object. It had spread. Screens still glowed at night, but they no longer felt authoritative. They felt performative. Families listened with new ears, noticing what wasn't said. Children asked questions again, uncomfortable ones. Waiting changed shape. It was no longer passive. It was alert. Weeks later, a small plaque appeared near the bus stop. No signature. No explanation. Just a sentence etched into the metal. What is promised matters less than who it is promised to. People touched it as they passed. Not in reverence, but in recognition. The story of Elias was already shifting into something half legend, half warning. Some would say he exaggerated. Others would deny he existed at all. That was expected. Erasure always follows truth. But the change that never reached the people had finally reached something else: awareness. And awareness, once settled, doesn't disappear easily. It waits. It watches. It remembers. Years later, when new voices rose and new promises filled the air, someone would always ask, quietly but clearly, where does it end? And somewhere, in a notebook, in a memory, or in the space between words, Elias's work continued, not as resistance, but as a reminder. If change never reaches the people, then the people will eventually reach the truth.